When Erik van den Berg married an MBA to his master's degree in chemistry, he did so with intentionality. While still a student, he'd straddled the line between science and the life science business, and he liked it. He liked the dichotomies, the contrasts, and even the occasional chaos. He still likes all that, and he's been navigating the chaos for nearly 30 years, starting out in management consulting with Arthur D. Little, an international management consulting firm that was founded by, you guessed it, and perhaps ironically, a chemist. From there, Erik moved to industry, working in business development for Isotis Orthobiologics and then Organon before joining the boards of Holland Bio and Lead Pharma, co-founding Heat Matrix Group and Memo Therapeutics. He's now chairman of the boards of Step Pharma, Tridec One, and Target Biopharmaceuticals, and a board member of AM Pharma, where he was previously CEO and chief business officer before that. Late last year, Erik became CEO at Memo Therapeutics, a developer of antiviral and anti-cancer monoclonal antibodies. Along the way, Erik has secured more than $500 million in financing deals for those early stage companies and tallied well over $1 billion in transactions, licensing, and partnership deals. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech. And on today's show, we're getting into the intentional embrace of chaos with Memo Therapeutics CEO, Erik van den Berg. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the invitation. And thanks for that introduction as well. Pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. As I rattled off in the prologue there, you've been a biotech builder for quite some time. And these experiences that you've gathered along the way, as I said, look to be intentionally curated from the outset, from my perspective anyway. So I was hoping we could start out by walking through some of the building blocks that you've sort of intentionally placed along the journey. Things like, your MBA, some of the early influences during your student life, and how that kind of formed up.
Well, pleasure to start there, Matt. Maybe it looks intentionally, but definitely it was not plotted out in this way when you start out working or even studying. But already during my student years, indeed, I focused on, combining science and business. So I studied both chemistry as well as business science, and later indeed on did my MBA, the business internship in Australia. So I already knew that I wanted to work beyond, say, the lab in a chemical lab. So I started my career indeed as a consultant because I thought that's, a nice broad way to start getting experience, do 3 or 4 months assignments in different industries, different settings, strategy, or more HR, or business process redesign, or innovation and R&D management. Mm-hmm. And in that process, I found out that that innovation side, the management of that was most interested to me. And it's also the first time that I encountered the biotech industry.
Yeah.
And
did you know, Erik, let me interrupt you real quick. Did you know that Arthur D. Little was a chemist? He was a trained chemist, the guy that founded
I probably knew at one point in time, but I didn't know anymore. So thanks for remembering me indeed.
It's pretty wild. Yeah. The Arthur D. Little was founded like in the late 1800s, early 1900s by Arthur D. Little. And he was a chemist. So you've got that in common with the man.
Yeah. It started also as more like an innovation center so it was labs where they basically invented products and got tasked from industry to work on stuff. Like new fuel cells and stuff like that. And then later on, what was added was indeed the management consulting business. Yeah. That was the part actually where I worked in. But the heritage was still there from R&D and innovation management. So the company in the 90s published books on how to do that, how to become a product juggernaut, or how to do fourth generation R&D management and stuff like that. Yeah. There were these gurus in-house that taught us youngsters on those methodologies. And you were exposed then to, of course, leaders in the industry, either chemical or pharma industry, on that part. And this is also why, for example, we did an assignment at a certain moment in time for a university in the Netherlands that wanted to do something in biotech, but it didn't have anything in its curriculum for its students to do biotech education. Mm-hmm. So it was a classical strategy evaluation where we looked at, okay, what does a market need? What is your competition doing? Where do you excel in from a competence perspective? So then what would be a logical fit to offer as a added value to students? So that's when I visited all biotech companies in the Netherlands, where were not that many at that time. And then eventually started to join one, being Isotus, that you have introduced as business developer, basically being involved with lots of different stuff, licensing agreements, also the IPO process and a merger process with a Swiss company, managing part of the R&D. So that was a very nice and broad experience, late 90s, early 2000s, benefiting from the boom at that point in time when going public in 2000.
Yeah.
Which was basically at the end of the cycle. So when we went public, our book emptied of the subscribed investors with interest. We were just able to close and float the company and progress its R&D.
Yeah.
Eventually, the company was sold. But the constant factor, the constant factor, at least on that journey, was, I guess I like challenges, learning, building teams, achieving results. So that has been more the constant thread through my career. So maybe it looks intentionally, in hindsight, it was definitely plotted out as an intentional course.
Yeah. You did mention to me the last time we spoke that your quote unquote board experience started as a student, and surely that had to influence you. Tell us a little bit about that. You served on some sort of a board as a student that had to have given you at least a taste of that fueled the flames a bit.
Yeah. Well, that's indeed. So yeah, it was like a union of students of about 1,000 students that come together, and they need to be managed and all the day-to-day activities, financing, etc. So as part, indeed, during my study, I stopped studying for a year to manage that part. They had 3 buildings under management. It was probably about, at that time, I guess about €1 million in, revenues that came in and needed to be managed, and lots of activities that were organized. So lots of different groups that need to be coordinated to have that those activities indeed performed. I was more on the commercial side of those activities, so how to get external money into that union of students supporting the activities and the representation. So I was more on the outside of the union, which was a lot of fun to do. It definitely helped indeed in the personal development.
It seems like
how to manage larger groups of people, for example.
Yeah, it seems like early experiences like that would certainly seed the desire to exercise those muscles down the road in your career.
Also the internship in Australia really helped. Far from home, being in a business environment in a different culture, having an assignment that needed to be finished in 3 months. Maybe that was a good step up towards the consulting life, indeed, where you basically finish and start a new project within 3 months or 4 months.
Right.
You have to be the expert and have to know a bit more than your customer.
Yeah.
So it was always a very fast learning course, because you had to stay ahead of your customer, and they, of course, are better subject matter experts than we were. We just had good methodologies, clear thinking, and then an outside view in, gathering information, making information transparent so that everybody has the same set of assumptions, or at least the same set of data and facts in front of them before further decisions were made. I think that was what the added value that consultants could provide to companies.
And how have you extrapolated that learning in your professional life beyond consultancy, in your biotech building life? Like, do you find yourself leaning into sort of that philosophy?
I still have a very analytical approach to things. So I like to know, what are the universe of companies that you need to get in touch with, right? If you have an approach for business development, what would be the reasons that they could be interested? And then how do you play to that? And the same goes for investors, for example. And also in discussions with teams, for example, on development questions, I think it's very helpful to know what the facts are and what opinions are, so
Mhm.
that we put them on the table and then have a factual discussion on it so that we take the best decisions possible with everybody informed on the same information level, knowing what risks you take, because in biotech, you always have to take decisions in the absence of data. There's never enough, but you have to make strides forward, not to lose a lot of time. But at least it's clear what the facts are and opinions so that you can move forward from there. So those are things I've taken along, probably besides, being able to make fancy PowerPoints.
uh, Making fact-based decisions in times of chaos. I mean, I can only it only becomes more important in times of chaos. And chaos might be an awfully strong word, but it's clickbait, right? So we're going to stick with it. But
we'll get to it. Yeah.
over the course of your career, I mean, to your point, you went public with the company in 2020, and then everything changed. Then there was COVID, and then everything changed again. And then shortly on the heels of COVID, everything changed again when the money dried up. Now, like here in the States, we find ourselves in a political a chaotic political scene that's having influence on biotech here in the States. So chaos is a constant, that at least uncertainty and dealing with outside forces, it's a constant. So I'm hoping we can maybe talk about some of your experiences and perhaps the way that you've leaned into your, fact-based decision-making mantra as you've faced down some of these chaotic outside influences, I guess.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Yeah. I thought we'd start with, I'm gonna rewind the clock here. There was a period of time pre-COVID that I think a lot of industry observers saw as problematic because it was gluttonous in terms of the money available to biotech builders. There are quite a few talking heads who said, this is a problem, while everyone was enjoying the freedom, the free flow of money that was going on. So that's chaotic. I mean, from some perspectives, it may be chaotic in a good way, but it's chaotic nonetheless. Tell us a little bit about your experience during that time, and particularly how you lean into your management philosophies to exercise some pragmatism and discernment when, capital is probably available everywhere you look.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was maybe even more so during COVID, right? Which was really the heydays when lots of money was available. Mm-hmm. I love that, right? Because it gives them plenty of opportunities to develop multiple products in parallel. And I must say, it was from a innovation timeframe, of course, a unique opportunity. If you think through it again, that in 9 months from start of knowing your antigen to having a vaccine available to roll out on a global scale, the human ingenuity basically that had to go to play, and the project management capabilities to manage these billions of investments with all sorts of parallel activities around the globe. That was a tremendous task. Yeah. We maybe already have forgotten about it. But I think that is basically what innovation can do. So when there is sufficient money available, I basically always believe in capital efficiency. What it will allow, of course, to do is pursue multiple compounds in parallel. And sometimes that's needed to mature a new technology. So for example, in an oncology company, if you can have from a platform 4 programs developed, you're pretty sure that probably one of them will be successful, but you're also pretty sure that probably half of them won't be successful, mm-hmm. which is, of course, then riskier if there's less money available and you have to make a bet on what is the compound to take forward. What we did with, for example, in Memo Therapeutics that I helped, that I co-founded, is I think we founded that in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, with our first financing round. And then we took it public in 2021 on the NASDAQ, bringing 2 programs into the clinic in the same year. So that has been a really fast development of assets. So being able to do every year a large financing round, stepping up towards an IPO, I think was critical, be able to, accelerate in that amount of speed, which of course changed then again when the climate, deteriorated, when the financial climate. And at that moment in time, at the board, we had this discussions around, instead of doing lots of activities in parallel so that you plan for the shortest route to BLA, we had, of course, to pace our investments because the investment climate was changing and we didn't know when and where there was access again to new capital. So that changes what you do in parallel, which might, of course, then increase the time to get your medicine to patients, which is, of course, not the best, but it's the reality. And secondly, of course, is what do you do in-house and what do you do in partnerships? So Lava Therapeutics, in the end, we had 2 partnerships in place, one with Janssen, the J&J pharma subsidiary that we had early on. And then later on, the company did a deal with Seagen, which was acquired by Pfizer thereafter. But then you can leverage, of course, the capital of another partner to do the clinical studies, which are expensive costs that you can then avoid, whilst it brings in an upfront as well, which extends the runway of a company. So those were choices that we made within Lava Therapeutics at that time. Other example, maybe with AM Pharma, where I was CEO at the time, we did an early deal with Pfizer after phase 1, ahead of phase 2 data, which was an option deal, $87.5 million upfront, and then $600 million total deal, with the intention that Pfizer would prepare for a seamless execution of the phase 3 after we finish phase 2. And there's already quite a bit of manufacturing activities, for example, that you need to invest in before you can enter into phase 3 activities. So that deal allowed us to accelerate potential development through phase 3 without spending that type of money, whilst preparing for phase 3 and hand over then to Pfizer. Well, that didn't happen at the time, so they did not exercise their option, which is, of course, fair, that more than half of the option deals are not exercised. Mm-hmm. So we built it already into the contract that we managed this clinical study. We retained all the manufacturing data that they provided so that we could seamlessly progress ourselves with the phase 3. The only caveat was we now needed to raise the money for a phase 3, which was a 1,600 patient study that we eventually run in across 4 continents. So that was quite an endeavor, which was also, by the way, during COVID. So we raised the money prior to COVID in July 2019. Mm-hmm. And then we already had to pivot. So we didn't submit yet our phase 3 protocol yet to the authorities. But then COVID came along and our product was to be tested in the intensive care units for patients that have an infection, sepsis, and acute kidney injury. And we wanted to treat that acute kidney injury part. Well, in COVID time, of course, you had lots of patients on the ICU with an infection, but not being flu this time, but COVID. Yeah. And then, of course, also had organ failures like kidney failure that we were treating. But we had no experience in that patient population because the phase 2 was done prior to COVID. Mm-hmm. So we needed to quickly adapt there in our plans. So we analyzed the situation and decided to exclude the COVID-19 patients from the main trial population because we had no previous experience in it, but still include these patients because the drug might be helpful in protecting the kidney also in these patients. So we included these patients in a specific cohort to evaluate the effect of our drug. Yeah. And which in the end, it was a small group of COVID patients included, but there seemed to be a tremendous lowering of mortality in that subgroup. Yeah. That was the reason to try it.
Yeah, you're getting ahead of me because the pandemic was the next point of chaos I wanted to dig into. So we're going to revisit that, but I've got a follow-up for you sure. before we move on around your comments on the fact that during the glut of money and that was happening just prior to and during COVID, there was also a corresponding glut of innovation. I mean, there was all sorts of innovation, and their innovation remains. With so much money, floating around all at once and so much innovation happening at the same time, what are your thoughts on why so many of those startup companies, startup biotechs who were well-heeled with cash leading into and during COVID have struggled or outright failed since? I mean, I know that there are, there are several, several, you could go along on, case studies on failed companies, but I'm curious, I guess just philosophically or generally, what your take is on like, what went wrong? You had all this money, you had a great scientific principle.
Yeah. Well, I think in general, it always takes a bit longer and costs more money to get innovation to a state that you can really claim success. And there are, of course, the rare successes that, had flawless execution. And part of that is also luck. I think, you can plan for luck a bit. You can try to shape the conditions that luck appears, maybe more frequently. And then if you recognize it as a leader, you can bank on that luck. But in general, it's not atypical that clinical studies take longer to execute, definitely during COVID and definitely thereafter. Certainly in the US. So somehow, resources disappeared, focused on clinical trials disappeared, became also much more expensive. So I think those are all factors that don't help, because if it costs more and it takes longer, you run out of cash if you have a large organization and a large burn rate. And I think that is basically where maybe companies have not adapted quickly enough to the new reality to say, well, we need to stretch money because we don't know when there's capital available anymore, and stuck too long to the original plan, which was the plan that was successful in the past and raised a lot of capital. And of course, provides a lot of chances. But it's very difficult to run a candy store, basically, of many different things. So focus, I think, in the end, is a critical success factor. And maintaining that focus with agile teams, I think that is a key part of the success of biotech. How I see it. Yeah.
You started to get into the COVID story with AM, and I'm wondering what else you can share about other aspects, I guess, that were affected by the pandemic that you had to manage through during that time. I mean, patient access and the decisions you made around who you would treat and how you would treat them in that clinical trial in terms of putting them in their own cohort. That was a great example. What else though? Like what else, things like supply chains, that were certainly crunched and remain in some cases, in a state of flux. Now, what other factors did COVID put in front of you that you needed to manage your way through?
I think on the clinical execution of the flexibility was a key part, and I think that is maintained in the execution of clinical studies. But for example, you had to have remote monitoring. You were not allowed to go into hospitals at that point in time and do site visits. So setting up the flexibility around management of the trial to be able to do that, home visits, for example, is something I think that is there now to stay. In the supply, well, another example maybe on the clinical side is that we set up a studio and did our investigator meetings live. We presented not from our desk, but from a studio, like what you would do in a meeting room. And then gathered the audience with lots of, multiple voting optionalities to engage the audience as much as possible in a remote way. Yeah. So those were things to be invented. Yeah, on the supply chain, it was just unpredictable. So I think the effect was it became more expensive, but also it was longer to procure materials. So instead of typically saying in manufacturing, within half a year, you should be able to get everything in. I think nowadays, suppliers, CDMOs, analyze what are the critical long lead time materials, which probably have to be ordered in 12 months or 9 months, at least in advance, to make sure that you don't have delays in starting up your trial for your manufacturing campaign. Mm-hmm. So I think those were things that the company had to deal with, and we were on it. And still, there are some remnants of that indeed in the supply chain, that it can still take these 9 or 12 months on long lead time items, where prior to that it basically was not the case.